So Tubi is easily my favorite of the free streaming services, and right now they've got 14 delightfully vicious movies to watch for free. So in this video, we're going to talk about 14 movies that are all violent, but they're all excellent watches, and they're from kind of a variety of genres. We've got martial arts movies, we've got some horror, we've got just some twisted thrillers. This video is sponsored by Every Plate, but first we're going to talk about my number 14 pick, Valhalla Rising. Now this is an unrated Viking movie directed by Nicholas Winding Refn, who's probably most famous for the movie Drive with Ryan Gosling, but he also did Bronson with Tom Hardy, and did Valhalla Rising with Mads Mikkelsen before those two. I say all that because Winding Refn has a very bizarre directorial style, and his movies are just weird as all get out. Valhalla Rising being less weird than a lot of his stuff though. Mads Mikkelsen is a total badass in this. He's basically a slave that's forced to fight, and then he goes on this crusade with these Vikings to essentially the New World, and the story becomes very unraveled, but it's beautifully shot. Mads Mikkelsen is a madman per usual, and it does have some interesting Viking elements, even if it goes completely off the rails towards the end. It's the case with most movies on this list. This one is not for everybody. If you don't like really vicious stuff, this is going to be one to maybe stay away from. One of the tamer movies on this list of wild picks is actually one of the more disturbing ones if you really think about it. There's just nothing that awful happening on camera in Elizabeth Harvest. So this is sort of like a modern gothic tale. This young, beautiful woman who looks just like a model marries this much older man who's brilliant and extremely wealthy. So that's kind of the setup. And as part of their marriage, he shows her this gigantic house. She gets basically everything she wants, but she's not allowed in one particular room. There goes some of the gothic themes. Now, this movie gets incredibly dark the further you go into it, but like I said, it's not particularly stomach-turning or that upsetting. The concept is, if you really think about it, but this is a pretty interesting mystery movie that does have some dark undertones. It's just not done in a way like some of the ones on this list that are just total bloodbaths. I could maybe say the same thing for my next pick, which does feature kind of a bloodbath, but this one's more of the aftermath of a shootout in the standoff at Sparrow Creek. Now this is about a group of self-proclaimed militiamen in modern day that meet at a lumberyard following a mass shooting event in their local town. They quickly determine that one of the men there is most likely responsible for the mass shooting, and then they begin interrogating each other. The entire movie takes place at this lumberyard. It's done on a very low budget, but it's got a fantastic look to it and some incredible actors. James Badgedale really leads this movie off. He's the main character and he carries it. He does a killer job interrogating all these different folks, and they're all played by great actors as well. There's some really intense moments in this, considering most of what you're seeing is just discussions between two people, but it is just expertly done and has some fantastic moments in it and ultimately builds up to a pretty fantastic climax. Okay, James Gunn is now most famous for Guardians of the Galaxy. He most recently did The Suicide Squad, and even more recently, he's now taken the helm of all the DC projects that Warner Brothers has, including TV and movies. But before all that, he wrote and directed a superhero movie of sorts starring Rainn Wilson called Super.
Don't steal! Don't deal drugs! Don't molest kids!
Now this was actually back when The Office was still hot, and Rainn Wilson not only plays a funny version of a superhero, you know, someone with no superpowers, kind of like in Kick-Ass, but Super is done by James Gunn, and even though it has some themes similar to Kick-Ass, it is just a much more bonkers movie. At times, it feels very realistic and it's really done for comedic purposes. I mean, if he hits someone with a monkey wrench, it is disturbing to say the least, but it's also James Gunn, so it's got like a weird, quirky nature to it. You've got an excellent role from Kevin Bacon. He plays a villain in this, and it's one of my favorite roles he's done in the last 20 years or so. I'm gonna say it one more time. I'm not gonna say it on every movie on this particular list. This one is not for everyone. It's got some really bizarre stuff, but if you've been a big fan of James Gunn's other projects, you may really enjoy this one. Just keep in mind, it's very different from his other superhero projects. Very different. Now, before moving on with the rest of the movies on this list, I do want to tell you about today's sponsor, EveryPlate. Over the past few months, I've been saving money by using EveryPlate instead of doing takeout or delivery, and I'm still getting these fast, easy meals that are absolutely delicious. EveryPlate lets you choose from 25 tasty meals that change out every single week so you'll never get bored, and they deliver top quality ingredients directly to your door. My favorite thing about EveryPlate though is that I don't have to buy a bunch of individual little things at the grocery store, and I don't have to overbuy. They only send me exactly what I need to make the recipes in the box, and everything I've cooked from them has been so delicious. I mean, just this past week, I made this beef and pepper dish. That's the second time I've made it. They actually sent me this the first box I got, and it's literally been my favorite thing I've eaten from EveryPlate. I ate 2 bowls of it in the same day. My wife couldn't stop talking about it. And it was as easy to make as Hamburger Helper. I also made this great little breaded chicken thing that I normally would never mess with, and it turned out delicious as well. I'm telling you, their stuff is great, and what sets them apart, because there's a lot of meal kits out there, is EveryPlate offers really low prices compared to some of the other ones. I've tried others in the past, and they've been fun experiences. I had no complaints, but they always felt overpriced for what you get. EveryPlate is easily the most reasonably priced meal kit I've ever seen. Again, the food is delicious and it's fun to cook. And right now, my viewers can get started with EveryPlate for just $1.49 per meal by going to everyplate.com and entering the code FLICK149. Again, that's $1.49 per meal. Another cool thing about EveryPlate is they let you swap things out. You can change proteins, you can change white rice for brown rice, all sorts of substitutions. They even allow you to add on things like sweets and desserts like Vanilla Cheesecake Delight. So again, go to everyplate.com and use my code FLICK149 to pay just $1.49 per meal. It's a fantastic deal, but speaking of fantastic stuff, let's talk about the rest of the movies on this list. All right, now we're gonna get down to a just wild, over-the-top horror movie that is a total bloodbath with an incredibly high body count, and it is somehow an underrated gem, Dog Soldiers. This is from writer-director Neil Marshall, who's more famous for The Descent and Doomsday, which is another really underrated, brutal movie, but Dog Soldiers is a wild werewolf movie. You follow a squad of soldiers camped out in a house out in the woods trying to prevent vicious dogmen from attacking them. So there's nothing too inventive there. It's a bunch of people with guns trapped in a house trying to keep monsters from getting in. It's the setup for Night of the Living Dead, except here they've got these giant humanoid werewolf-style creatures that have been engineered for the military. While their costume design is not perfect, it's mostly because of a lack of budget. They are really cool looking, and the way that this was directed actually makes the lower budget work pretty well. It's got some incredibly intense moments that look really cool on camera. Again, for a lower budget horror movie, this one punches way above its weight. Okay, now far and away the most disturbing one on this list is my next pick, ICHI the Killer. Now, I've said that not all movies on this list are for everybody. This one is not for people who are easily disturbed. This is an incredibly disturbing movie. It is about a mass killer who not only behaves in a disturbing way, just his appearance is disturbing. I'm actually very limited on how much I can show you from this movie, but it is a cult classic. It is directed by Takashi Miike, who has done over 100 movies. And while he is pretty famous for this movie, this movie stands out. You're not going to forget having watched it, but Takashi Miike actually is featured on this list again with my number 3 spot and my number 1 spot. I did not do that on purpose. That's not how I pick out my list, but he's such an incredible director, and he really does kind of fit into this particular wheelhouse of incredibly disturbing movies. But if you're into that kind of stuff, it is really cool that it's free on Tubi right now. All right, now my next pick on this list is one of the darkest in its subject matter, and it ultimately does go to that dark place, but the road to get there is a little bit more digestible in Cold in July.
You want some of this? Huh?
That's for my car. And that's for my hat.
This stars Michael C. Hall from Dexter, who is the victim of a home invasion that maybe drives him a little bit nuts, but ultimately, the person hunting him down, they end up having to team up to go after somebody way worse. That's a little bit of a spoiler, but man, this one's got some twists and turns in it, and some fantastic characters. Sam Shepard is incredible in this. This is one of the best roles he had shortly before he died. Don Johnson, this is one of my favorite roles I've ever seen him in. Not only do I love his character, but he just brings this guy to life really well in this movie, especially to do something like this so late in his career. But these three guys end up teaming up in a way that's very unusual, in a way that I've never seen before, but it felt like it worked. It felt realistic. This one's got a lower body count than most of the ones on this list, but once this one decides to get brutal and disturbing, it definitely does, and it kind of stays there. So tread lightly with this one, but this is a killer thriller movie that will appeal to, I think, a pretty broad audience compared to most of the things on this list. Another one that I was so excited to see included on Tubi is one that I try to watch every couple of Halloweens. I typically have to rent it because it's so rarely available on streaming services. In the Mouth of Madness. Now, this is actually from John Carpenter, and it's easily one of his lesser known movies, but it's also a bit of a cult classic of his. This one does have a pretty intense following, even if it's a small one. Sam Neill stars in this, and the basic setup here is that there's a writer named Sutter Kane who's very similar to Stephen King. They even have the same initials, wink wink. But elements from his horror novels begin to take place in real life. And this movie goes into some incredibly dark directions. Not only that, but there's some fantastic practical effects. I mean, monster designs done by Stan Winston, but also just neat little camera tricks that are incredibly spooky. There's always something interesting happening just around the corner that, again, is going to just keep you locked into this one. This is just a wild, crazy Halloween movie to watch. I know we're far away from that season, but if you like stuff like that and you've never seen this gem, this is probably going to be one of your new favorite movies. If you don't like anything that I just described, my next pick on this list might be the one for you because it's easily the least disturbing out of anything I'm talking about here, and it's the only animated movie on the list, A Scanner Darkly. Now, this is for adults, it is not for children. This is actually directed by Richard Linklater, who's most famous for Dazed and Confused, Boyhood, and the Before Sunrise series. So a really fantastic filmmaker, but A Scanner Darkly was just cutting edge when it came out. Waking Life was another one done in this style, but A Scanner Darkly was way ahead of its time. They filmed all the actors, and it's great actors like Robert Downey Jr., Woody Harrelson, obviously Keanu Reeves, and then they animated the footage. This is something that would be much easier to do today. In fact, you can probably do similar things with your smartphone, but back when this was released, this was cutting edge technology, and not only does it bring a really cool look to A Scanner Darkly, but the concept, the reason to do it this way, actually supports the sci-fi elements of this story. Now, this one ultimately does go into a dark direction, but if you're the least bit interested in a really thinky sci-fi movie and you've somehow never seen this gem, definitely check it out before it leaves Tubi, because this is another one I rarely see available anywhere. My next pick, I've not seen for free anywhere, I don't think ever. It typically is hiding out on Shudder, but it's also just one of the coolest and most metal movies to have been released in the past decade, Mandy.
It glowed from within, strange and eternal.
Now, longtime subscribers of the show know I love this movie. I've done videos on it. I've got shirts I wear from it. Not that it's my favorite movie. I don't want to oversell it, but I just like a lot of elements about it. Now, I do understand why a lot of people don't like this movie. I realize a lot of people find Nicolas Cage to be off-putting, to say the least, but the directorial style here could also be off-putting. The first half, not the first 30 minutes, the first half of Mandy goes at a snail's pace. It is incredibly slow, so you need to be into the music and the aesthetic and Nicolas Cage in order to really enjoy that first half. And then the movie completely changes its tone and it turns into this wild, violent, psychedelic nightmare that is an actual joy to watch. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's disturbing. There's a lot of wild stuff that takes place, but it is just horror movie magic. If you're the least bit interested in that type of movie and you've never seen Mandy, check it out, but do me a favor and please be patient on the first half. I've warned you, it's incredibly slow, it will pick up, but if you tend to not really like artsier movies, Mandy's oozing art out of every orifice, so you might want to tread lightly with this one as well. I happen to love it. Okay, now there are some dark movies on this list, but I think my next pick is somehow one of the darkest movies I've ever seen. And I've seen some really disturbing stuff, but there is something about The Road that feels way too real to me. Now, this is based on the book by Cormac McCarthy, which I've actually read. I don't actually read a lot of books, but I've read that one, and this is an excellent film. Even if there's not a plot-driven story at its core, some of my favorite movies don't have a plot. Most Martin Scorsese movies don't have a plot. You're really just following a father and son after the apocalypse, and the vision of the apocalypse here feels too real. And this was directed by John Hillcoat, who had just previously done The Proposition, which I think is one of the best westerns of the 21st century so far. And it could be said that the post-apocalyptic movies are kind of like the modern westerns, but The Road just delves into some incredible themes about survival, and not the ones you typically get, not how to survive, but why to survive. This one is stomach-turning at times, but it is just expertly directed. I think it's John Hillcoat's second best movie, is right behind The Proposition, not far behind it either. Viggo Mortensen is incredible in this. If you've never seen it, I highly recommend it, but it can be so depressing. Make sure you're in the right headspace before you watch The Road, please. Takashi Miike makes the list again with my number 3 pick, probably the one he's most famous for, Audition. Now, this too has an incredibly slow pace, but if you ever go looking for hidden gem horror movies or horror movie masterpieces, lesser known horror movies, Audition will be near the top of almost every list you find. You can Google it, I promise you, you're going to find Audition ranked high on a bunch of them. This is about another wealthy man who wants to take a young wife, but he actually has women audition for the role. Basic setup, but the woman he chooses, man, does he choose wrong. It doesn't seem like he does, but boy, does he. And, like I said, the pace is slow, but man, is there a payoff. If you don't mind a slow burn with not just a good payoff, like in terms of storytelling, but a very memorable cinematic one, Audition is not only a very good pick on this list, it's kind of required viewing. It's influenced a lot of things, and it really does stand out. It doesn't feel like it was derived from other horror movies. It very much has its own unique flavor. And I'm always blown away at how unique Takashi Miike's work can be from project to project, considering he does so many movies. Now, my number 2 pick is also a violent Japanese movie, not directed by Takashi Miike, but it feels like it could have been. This, too, is a cult classic from Japan that is just a bloodbath of a movie, Battle Royale. Not only was this movie the influence for Go-Go from Kill Bill, but one of the main characters in Battle Royale actually played Go-Go in Kill Bill. And it's very much that type of movie. It's a little tongue-in-cheek, it's a little bit fun, but it's also brutal and violent. A bunch of grade school kids are sent out to this island to just do battle to the death until there's one left. Very much like the Hunger Games, but without all the pageantry. They get into it very quick, and the entire movie is the battle, basically. So, if you were a little bit bummed by the Hunger Games, you thought the PG-13 rating was ridiculous and it was not nearly as violent as you wanted it to be, definitely check out Battle Royale. And then Takashi Miike is back with my number 1 pick, one of the coolest modern-day samurai movies I've ever seen. I say modern-day because really the best ones were directed by Akira Kurosawa. They're almost 100 years old now, but 13 Assassins is top-notch stuff, especially when you consider how brutal and bloody it is, and ultimately how wild and over the top it is towards the end. This too, very much like Kill Bill in terms of how big and bloody it is in its final battle. But even though it does go over the top ultimately, it typically stays pretty grounded, which somehow makes the over-the-top stuff feel even more realistic and that much better. If you've got the slightest affinity for samurai anything, samurai movies, samurai anything, 13 Assassins is a must-watch. Don't wait, watch it soon, you're gonna be blown away. Do keep in mind all these Japanese picks I've made on this list though will have subtitles. Tubi does not typically have dubbed versions. If they do though, they tend to be a second version with a completely second tile on screen. So be sure to look out for that. It's not necessarily something you can change in the settings, but that is the list. I hope you found something just wonderfully bloody to watch this weekend. The full list of all the movies discussed can be found in the top pinned comment down below. Thanks again to Every Plate for sponsoring this video. Their link is in the top pinned comment and the video description as well, but I will keep making these videos as long as you keep watching them. Thanks for checking out the special Tubi episode, and you will see me on the next one.